Good morning. Welcome to our Bible study hour here at Three Rivers Baptist Church in Irmo, South Carolina. Happy last Sunday of the month of February. This week we're going to continue our study on Christian doctrine using Wayne Grudem's book called Christian Beliefs. And this week we're going to be pondering the question, what is man? What is man? And you'd be surprised to go online how opaque, how nebulous, how unclear people are in trying to define what man is. And, kind of, I guess the kissing cousin to that question is, what is life? And when you try to see what the world has to say about those, they're either really vague and kind of fuzzy, or they're really clinical and scientific, but they all kind of leave you feeling a little bit empty as far as their ability to really give you a clear handle on what is man. I read this online, so it's got to be true. Life, the definition of life, is defined as any system capable of performing functions such as eating, metabolizing, excreting, breathing, moving, growing, reproducing, and responding to external stimuli. So there you go. We could probably just wrap up here and call it a day and feel like we did our job. Merriam-Webster defines man as an individual human, especially an adult male human. Again, a very satisfying answer to what we're trying to do. I can remember years ago I taught over at Ben Lippen across town. I had this student. I love this kid. He was from South Korea. His English was really, really poor as far as speaking, but he understood it pretty well. He was just brilliant. He's one of the most brilliant kids that I taught. And he lived in the dorms on campus, and his other students were always trying to share the gospel with him. He was not a Christian, and he was really just kind of out in left field. Like he didn't even know how to process what they were saying, and he would come in to see me after class like a couple days a week, and he'd ask me questions, sometimes about biology. That's what I taught, but he would ask me questions about the Bible, about God, about life, about the gospel. Like, what does this mean? These people keep telling me this stuff, but I don't even know what they're talking about. And so I had opportunities to share the gospel with this young man, and he would he'd always fall back on, well, that doesn't mesh with science. That's not according to evolution. Not according. I just believe in evolution. I just believe in the processes of biology and science. And what you're telling me that there's a God and that He created, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. And I can remember asking him, well, what do you think man is? What do you think life is? More specifically, why are you important? What makes you any different than a dog or a horse or a fish? He had no answer. He would just look completely puzzled. He did not have an answer to those questions about why is he important? Why does he have value? Why should I have any respect for him greater than my cat? He didn't know how to answer that with his scientific paradigm that he was viewing the world through. Well, what is man? The psalmist even asked that question back in Psalm chapter 8, verse 4, when pondering it within the context of pondering the bigness of God juxtaposed with the smallness of man. He said, what is man, that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man, that you care for him? Well, the first place we see man is all the way back in the beginning, in the creation account, back in Genesis 1. Genesis 1, 26 and 27, God has, this is toward the end of the chapter, he's gone through creation. He's created the heavens and the earth. He's created the stars, the sun, the moon, the fish, the camels, the birds. And then he says this in verse 26, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. So there was a definite point in time when man did not exist, when man came into being. Prior to that, God existed, but man did not. And we see here from the Genesis account that God drew his inspiration. I got to be honest, I feel really imprecise here with my language. I don't know, does God get inspiration? He got his idea for man from somewhere, from someone, himself. In one regard, that could be true of everything that God made, because he created everything ex nihilo. He didn't go to the junkyard and then see how he could repurpose stuff that was already there. So he was his own inspiration for everything that he did. But in creating man, there's something unique, something special that God does. In creating man, God endowed man with God's image. No other part of creation, no matter how good it was, and it was all good, at least initially, God declared that it was good. About no other part of creation could it be said, that resembles God. That privilege was unique to mankind. So that leads to the question, what does it mean to be created in the image of God? John MacArthur says about the image of God, it defines man's unique relation to God. Man is a living being capable of embodying God's communicable attributes. In his rational life, he was like God in that he could reason and had intellect, will, and emotion. In the moral sense, he was like God because he was good and sinless. He goes on speaking about the distinctions between the genders, maleness and femaleness of humanity. He says, while these two persons equally shared God's image and together exercised dominion over creation, they were by divine design physically diverse in order to accomplish God's mandate to multiply. That is, neither one could reproduce offspring without the other. In their excellent Old Testament commentary, Kyle and Delitzsch say that the image of God consists, therefore, in the spiritual personality of man. They go on to say that this concrete essence of the divine likeness was shattered by sin, and it's only through Christ, the brightness of the glory of God and the expression of his essence, that our nature is transformed into the image of God again. We will come back to that point as we continue our look here this morning. And then Wayne Grudem says there's some with regards to being God's image bearer, it's reflected in human beings like us. It's reflected in things like our morality. That is our sense of right and wrong. That reflects the perfect morality of God. Also, the fact that we possess a spirit. God is spirit. We have spirits. And these are all reflections of mankind being created in the image of God. Our ability to think and process information, that reflects God's knowledge. Also, our ability to relate to others and our desire for community. Those are reflections of God's perfect community that he enjoys within the Trinity. When I think these are all helpful from MacArthur and Kyle and Delitzsch and Dr. Grudem. When I think of what does it mean to be in the image of God, creating the image of God, my mind goes to a couple of genealogies. Those are like to me, generally speaking, the this is sacrilegious what I'm about to say. Those are like the worst parts of the Bible. When I'm having my quiet time, I'm like, genealogy. It's like just lunch bag letdown. I want to go to something else instead of just, this is the son of so-and-so, this is the son of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. But when I'm thinking about being created in the image of God, I think of a couple of genealogies, one from the Gospels and one from Genesis. In Genesis 5, the beginning of the chapter says this: this is the book of the generations of Adam, Adam being the first man who God created. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. So there it is, the likeness of God. Male and female he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. Here it's the same word, this word image or likeness. The Hebrew word is bidmut, and it's used to connote that passing down, that lineage of one image to the next generation. The traits, the attributes, or at least a trait or attribute from one generation to the next. Again, I feel very imprecise with my words here to refer to God as a generation. I guess he's the original generator. But yeah, what God was, he passed some of that down to Adam when he created him with his image. And then it goes on that God created man in his likeness or his image. And then Adam, he fathered a son in his own likeness. Adam begat a son, for you King James prefers. It's the same word, that Adam shared the likeness of God, and then Seth shared the likeness of Adam. So there's something, this image of God is being passed down from generation to generation. Well, then let's fast forward to thousands of years to the arrival of Jesus, the baby, in Luke 3. Luke is spelling out all those Old Testament generations that led to Jesus, and he picking up in verse 23, talking about Jesus. When he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age, being the son, as was supposed, of Joseph, the son of Heli. And then rather than reading 15 verses of a genealogy, let's skip to the end. Luke says this as he's tracing Jesus' earthly lineage all the way back. He says, the son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. Scripture's painting a picture for us that mankind derives its life and special standing from God himself. In our ability to reason and emote feelings and carry on the line of the species through which the Messiah would come and did come, all of that derives from the fact that man came from God and bears the image of God. So that means we, people, humans, are special, but don't get a fat head. This has led some to go off the rails and speak of things like the spark of the divine, lots of kind of mystical sects, and even going back to the time of our New Testament writers, the Gnostics. That's what they believed, that there was this divine spark, this little piece of God that indwelled every human, and it lives in every person, and that spark needs to be fanned and cultivated. And anyway, that's not what we're talking about here. That's heretical, so be careful. But at the same time, we do need to recognize that each of us, every one of us, every other person on the planet, including that homeless guy in the stinky old trench coat that's talking to himself, every one of us was created in God's image. It tells us that the very fabric that we're made up of was endowed with a unique value by God himself. But we need to remember that while we carry the divine image, we're not God. Blaise Pascal, who was I'd like to think, a born-again Roman Catholic, I hope. He was a brilliant mathematician. He was a philosopher. He was a Christian Catholic theologian back in the time of the European Enlightenment, when man was being held up as just the highest form of life and the highest form of greatness and potential, when all the art and all the music, philosophy, all pointed to the, and I mean this in the worst possible way, into the godlikeness of man, just that man was like basically man was man's own idol. We were so great and so special. Pascal rejected this humanistic, man-centered view of the universe, and he said, man is special, but he's special because Christ died on a cross for him, not because there was some inherently great thing within man, this spark of the divine that mystics and humanists like to point to, but rather man derives his specialness from God, not that man is God. And it's particularly evidenced in the fact that the Son of God died to save man. He didn't die to save horses or squirrels or sea cucumbers. He died to save human beings. And so we are special and unique in that regard. So hopefully we can see that God made man, and there is something special about man that comes from being God's image bearers. But we need to recognize that God did not create man because there was something missing in God's life, that he was lonely, or that he needed something from us. God didn't need anything from human beings. But even though he didn't need us to bring him glory, he still chose to create us, and we will bring him glory. In referring to his people, God said this in Isaiah, "Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made." So God created people to bring him glory. The reason why God made us is to bring us, or for us to bring him glory. So let me ask this. Do you think it would serve me and you well to recognize that fact and to live our lives in light of that fact? Or let me put it this way. Does knowing that you were created to bring God glory, does it affect how you live? Living to glorify God will give our lives purpose and meaning. It will lead to our ultimate joy and contentment. So then implicitly, let me ask this question. What if I'm living for any other reason? If it's not to glorify God, no matter how good or noble that reason is, maybe I'm trying to find a cure for cancer, or I'm saving orphans from burning buildings. As great as those things are, will they lead to my ultimate contentment and joy, my peace, my sense of satisfaction from life? Those things can't. Our whole, to borrow from the French, our raison d'etre, our whole reason for being is to bring glory to our Creator. And so if I'm living for something else, if I have another reason for living that's not God, then I should not expect for it to bring me ultimate satisfaction. In fact, it might even lead to misery. And it's John Piper famously said, "God is most glorified when I am most satisfied in him." It is so because God made it so. He made us so. David says this, talking about his God, our God. You made known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. So our happiness, our joy, our sense of fulfillment, all of that depends on how well we grasp this truth and live accordingly, that you and I were created to bring glory to God. Well, when I first saw the topic for today's study, what is man, my mind immediately went to another verse in the Gospels. And it kind of prompts the question, well, what would Jesus say? If you were to ask him that question, what is man? How would Jesus answer that? And remember, Jesus is God. He knows everything. And he came to save needy mankind. And that's something, too, in all of this. One other thing you could say about man is that man, us, we are the reason Jesus had to come to earth and die on a cross. So for everything else that we say this morning, that's one more thing as we need to recognize as part of our identity. But Jesus came to save needy mankind, so he obviously loves us. And he saved us by making the biggest sacrifice in the history of the universe. So we are an object of his affection. I mean, besides God himself, we're the apple of his eye, if I could put it that way. So how would he answer the question about the people that he loves so much? Well, this is the verse that I think of when I hear the question, what is man? Jesus, earlier in the chapter of John's Gospel, chapter 2, he changed the water into wine. He was beginning his earthly ministry. But he says this, John the Gospel writer, here in verse 23 of chapter 2, now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them, because he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man. What does that mean? Is that a happy way to end that chapter, or is that a dun dun dun, like there's some kind of mysterious revelation that's about to happen? What does it mean that he knew what was in man? When the Duke of Wellington had defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, and he was kind of winding his way back toward England, he went through the city of Brussels, and a massive crowd came out, and they were cheering him, and he was just the greatest hero. He was the liberator of Europe after this, this French, some viewed him as a tyrant, was just conquering all over Western Europe and pushing into Eastern Europe. Everybody came out to cheer the Duke of Wellington. Somebody finally gave Napoleon his comeuppance, and afterward, one of the Duke's friends, somebody asked him if he felt honored at being feted as a hero by the people of the city, and the Duke replied, "Not at all. If I had lost the battle, the same people would have shot me." The Duke of Wellington had a good understanding, he had a keen insight about what was in man. And so too did Jesus. So what was it that Jesus knew about man? I gotta be honest, with this whole study, this was the easiest part. Trying to find something that Scripture says about man and the human condition wasn't difficult. There's lots of it. But here's just a few highlights, if I could put it that way. This is what God has to say about man, and what Jesus knew about man. Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? That's what Jesus knew about man. That's why Jesus had to come to earth to die on a cross to rescue us, from ourselves. Psalm 37:32, the wicked watches for the righteous and seeks to put him to death. That I've been reading in the Psalms lately, and I just came across that the other day, and I just cited as an example. There's actually people in this world that can be characterized as being wicked. And look at how it describes this guy, that he's actually on the lookout, and when he sees somebody righteous, he wants to kill him just for being righteous. Do you see what an indictment that is on the human condition? Going back to Genesis, the account leading up to the flood, God speaking, this is how he summarizes all of us, the entire human race. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. That's a pretty all-encompassing statement, isn't it? By God Almighty, who knows our hearts, that every intention, every thought we have is wicked, and every implication and application and rabbit trail that our minds go down is also wicked. And it's something that it's continually so. It's not going to get better this afternoon. It's not going to get better after a couple of aspirin. It's not something I'm going to grow out of, that a month from now or 10 years from now I can look back and go, wow, I used to be wicked, but not anymore. No, his heart was, the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. This describes us, our species, all of us. And then, this is one that I just came across, an image for you guys to just absorb. Again, I've been reading in the Minor Prophets lately as well. Hosea chapter 2, again, this is God talking about his people. He's addressing the various peoples, tribes of Israel, and here he's specifically talking about Israel or Ephraim, one of Joseph's, or the lineage of named after Joseph's son, Ephraim or Ephraim. He says, and now they sin more and more. These are God's people. These are not pagans. These are God's people that should have known better. They sin more and more and make for themselves metal images, idols skillfully made of their silver, all of them the work of craftsmen. It is said of them, those who offer human sacrifice kiss calves. Look at what that says. These people, God's people, they're supposed to be God's people, except their allegiance wasn't to God. Their allegiance was to a calf, was to a cow, the image of a cow. It wasn't even a cow that God created. It was a metal image that a craftsman made of a cow that God created, and they were worshiping it. This thing was a second derivative of the real thing, which was just a created animal anyway, and they worshipped it. And in their attempts to show their affection and their allegiance and their love for this calf, they were willing to take their own babies and pass them into the fire to show their affection, their worship of this metal image of a cow. Wow. Where did Jeremiah get his idea that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick? Hosea gives us some insight of just what we're capable of as a race, as a species. We can do some pretty heinous things. Man is the reason that Jesus had to come and die. So what did Jesus know about mankind? Alluding back to John chapter 2, we knew that those same people who were so impressed with his miracles that they wanted to declare him the Messiah. They wanted to, they believed in his name, they believed in him, and they wanted him to be the Messiah that would deliver them from the Roman oppressors. Well, Jesus knew that those folk could just as quickly turn against him when he suggested that each of them had a cross of their own that they needed to bear. But he didn't just smugly sit back and judge them for their caprice. In fact, in the very next chapter of John's Gospel, in John chapter 3, Jesus was talking to the religious leader Nicodemus, and he told him, he said, God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world. That follows up our favorite John 3:16. That's John 3:17. God didn't send me here to condemn the world. So even though Jesus knew this about man's condition, man's heart, he didn't come in to condemn us. He knew that man is desperate and in need of saving. That's why he came to earth, not to condemn, but to save. And so for us, Christians in 2021 in the USA, what does all this mean for us? Well, at least a couple of things. For those of us who grew up in the church and, we really haven't been that bad, we need to recognize that we could have been a whole lot worse without God's grace in our lives. So we need to be thankful. We need to be grateful for God's grace. And then for those of us with a more checkered past, with a resume that's not very flattering, we may have a clearer picture of just how rotten we were before God saved us. We also need to be grateful for God's grace in our lives. And then for all of us that are living in this world surrounded by a bunch of fallen people, and that's all of us. We're surrounded by a bunch of fallen people, and we are fallen ourselves. If we understand Scripture, we ought not be surprised when we see wickedness going on all around the world and in our own community. There's nothing new under the sun. People in Jeremiah's day had deceitful and desperately sick hearts. They still are afflicted with that condition today. But now, with all this in mind, let's try to bring this full circle. Those of us whom God has rescued from our sinful heritage, we now, more than at any time in our past, we have the ability to bring God glory like we were created to do, and to delight in doing so. And a big chubby way that we do that is to take an active part in restoring lost sinners to their Creator. Romans 10 says, "How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news." You and I have a role to play in the enormous responsibility of declaring God's glory and his gospel and reaching our neighbors and the nations with God's life-saving message of hope. And in so doing, God is glorified in our declaration of his, or a proclamation of his gospel, but it compounds because as a sinner is redeemed, that's one more image bearer reflecting God's glory, doing what God created them to do. So in considering the question, what is man? The last thing I want to say is this. I want to add this to our whole discussion. What is man? Man, for everything else you have to say about us, man is the means by which the life-giving gospel message is spread to people in need of rescue. And once rescued, those former blasphemers are now glorious worshipers and reflections of our great God. God bless you. I hope you all have a great week and enjoy being God's image bearer.